This lesson is going to be a conclusion to this project where we're loading content dynamically, and as the user scrolls down, we're going to load additional content until there's no more content to load, and then we're just going to disappear the message block from the user's view. And you can see that when you do the inspect that we still have that message area that says loading, but it's got display none. And you can customize this to act however you need it to act. I'm going to reset this back to page 1. So that's our initial first page, so that that first page loads properly and all of the functionality is there. So there's quite a bit that you can do to still tweak this application. And of course, depending on what type of content and how you want to output the content, there's you can practice as well with what's being returned back in this API, and then customize it for your own purposes within your own API. So this one is just an array-based that's being returned back. So it's an array within an array, and each one of these array items has a particular piece of content. So there's a description, there's more like kind of a headline there, and there's a link to where the course is located. That's the number of reviews, that's the rating, that's when it was created, and so on. So there's some additional information that can be added in. So if you wanted to, you could customize this, and I'll do a quick customization with adding in some more content. And as we're doing the inner HTML, this is a template literal, so we can do spaces, and that will bring us to the next line. And if we want to have some additional content, all we have to do is use the $ in the curly brackets to bring additional variables into this. So we can say that this, so number 5 is the rating. So using the post index 5 stars by, and then we can have another value, students, and maybe we want to do an HR here to separate the posts. So it looks a little bit different, and you can play around with the content that's being returned, and so now it looks a little bit better. You can also include URLs and hyperlinks, so if we want to view the content to a href and link it to wherever the URL is. So if you're linking out to some content, and you might also want to have another title here. So you could add in the hyperlinks that way. And it's all coming from the API. So again, they will vary depending on what you're getting returned back from the API. So this one, maybe it's 0. And then we've got number 2 there, so post 2. So now we're linking out. We've got a title for each one. We've got the rating and so on. So we've got all of that information is being appended there. So just a quick overview of how we set up this application. So we started out by a basic HTML structure. We added in some height for the header and footer to simulate some type of web page content that might potentially be added onto the page. So make this a little bit bigger, and we've got our top content there, and then all of this content is going to continuously load as the user scrolls down. They get a quick message there that says loading as it's loading additional content on the page, and then when it runs out of content to load, so it's just loading them by the chunks of pages. And we just got some basic HTML structure, so the 3 main elements there, the header, the section, and the footer. And then JavaScript is doing all of the behind the scenes work where it's connecting to so it's using the URL, connecting to a web endpoint that requires a page value, so that's provided with p equals whatever the page value is. So we're starting our page off at 1, and we're incrementing those pages as we load more content. So we have new content that's being presented for the user. We created a main variable called page. So this is a main object where we can load the page information. So that's loading more, message, and the different element containers that we constructed. And then we've got this first load function that's clearing out the inner HTML from the page container, and then it's running a function called get courses. And this is where all of really the stuff happens, is that we take the URL, we make our fetch request, return back it as JSON, we check to see if there's more pages. If there's more pages, then we re-enable the ability to load it on the scroll. We also provide some text content back to the user. If there's no more pages to load, then we're going to end the loading, and we just hide the message element, and all of the content is still loaded there. We've got a few console messages here that we're using on debugging. So these can be blocked out, so you don't have to have these, of course. And as you're debugging your application, you're going to want to use the console log in order to make sure that you've got your variables and your data picked up properly. Then we're invoking a function called render post, which is the one that actually builds the HTML. So everything is broken apart. We also have one that listens for the on window scroll event object. We looked at the variables that we needed to consider when we're trying to figure out where we're positioned on the page and where the user's positioned on the page. And then once we do that calculation, if the condition is met, then we load more content. So we do the add new posts. And what add new posts does is it's the same thing as get courses, but we're incrementing the page value so that we get the new page. So then we're running the function get posts or get courses, which is getting all of the post information. And then lastly, the render the post was the one that is constructing the content, the visible content for the user. So we're looping through all of the data. So this has to be as an array object that gets passed into the render posts so that it can render the posts out, taking out the structure, which we saw that it's another array inside of there. So just depending on what the index values are, we can return back the associated values. And then once we construct the inner HTML, we just append a new div to the main page container, and we continuously loop through until there's no more posts available within the data that was sent to the render posts. If you have any questions or comments, I'm always happy to help. I've included all of the source code, and I do encourage you to try it out for yourself, connect to other endpoints, and update the values, and make sure that you can load the content, and use console log, of course, to see how the data is structured so that you can get the appropriate values. And keep in mind as well that it could vary. So you might not always have the page increments. You might have different posts by numbers, and then you'd have to check to see if there's values there that's being returned back. So there's a number of different ways that this could be handled, and it all depends on the API and how the JSON object is being returned back from the API endpoint. Thanks again for taking this course in this section, and I'll see you in the next one.